Today we are going to be learning about the Industrial Revolution in America and how it changes every way of life in the United States. The Industrial Revolution has an official definition that is the transformation from an agriculture-based society to an industrial-based society. This means that before the Industrial Revolution, most of the people made their money on farming, and farms were all over the country. This meant that people were pretty spread out from one another. After the Industrial Revolution, most of the people made their money working in factories. When industry came around, it also led to the creation of cities because people needed less land and needed to be closer to work. Also, before the Industrial Revolution, most of the work that was done with the use of handmade tools or animals. After the Industrial Revolution, everything is done using machines now. The Industrial Revolution actually occurs at two different times in America's history. The first started in the 1820s, and the second would occur in the early 1900s. The Industrial Revolution originally begins in England in the 1700s. If you watch the London 2012 Olympics, the opening ceremony was completely dedicated to the transformation that the Industrial Revolution had on society. You can see in this picture, which is in the arena during the opening ceremony, that everything is agriculture-based. It's a teeny village. Houses are spread out from each other. Everyone is farmers. And then you can see that industry begins to rise, and the land is transformed for big smokestacks and big machines, and there's very little grass and very little towns, and now there's lots and lots of cities. And so it really began in England, and it's going to spread to America about 50 years later in the 1820s. The first Industrial Revolution, which is the only one we're going to talk about in this class, is from 1820 to 1870 in the United States. It's going to start in the textile and clothing industry. Until this point, all clothing was made by hand at home for most Americans. Very few Americans were wealthy enough to buy clothing made by somebody else. So this is going to be a drastic change when clothing can now be made pretty cheaply in factories in America. And you can see that it's going to originally be water powered, and it's going to be used by this machine called the spinning jenny. You don't need to know the spinning jenny, but this was the first machine in America for the Industrial Revolution. Water power is eventually going to be replaced by steam power. They learned that if water was heated up, it could produce even more power than regular running water. It also had some advantages that it was portable and you could transport it pretty easy. Like a bucket of water is pretty easy to carry. It's much more powerful, like I said. Hot water, like the boiling water, is going to produce more power. And you don't have to be near a source of constant running water. So you don't have to be next to a waterfall or a river. You can transport water to other places. Eventually, steam power is going to be replaced by coal. And what's going to happen is the coal is going to be burned to heat up the water to run those steam engines. But they learned very quickly that out of the coal, you could make iron. And then out of iron, you could make steel. And eventually, steel can make these massive machines and massive factories that replace any other need for power and are going to replace a lot of things done at home before the Industrial Revolution. You can see here the process of turning the coal into iron. The Industrial Revolution is going to change many things in America's life. There are three main changes to the way things were run in America after the Industrial Revolution: transportation, communication, and how people lived. And those are going to be the really big categories that we're going to look at when we look at how America changed. Some examples for each category. The big ones for transportation are going to be the steamboat, which you can see in this picture, and the railroad, which we'll get into in a minute. Communication is going to change because people are going to be able to talk to each other faster through mainly the use of the telegraph, but we'll also talk a little bit about the Pony Express. And then the way in life in America is going to be radically different because people aren't trapped on their farms anymore. Cities are going to develop. People are going to be able to have a lot more free time because they're not doing everything by hand, and it's just going to change how we live. The 7 most important inventions of the first Industrial Revolution can be seen right here. The first of these is the Transcontinental Railroad. This was flippin' cool. Before the Transcontinental Railroad, the only way to transport goods, people, anything that needed to be moved across the country was with horses or on a boat on the river. The railroad is going to be way, way, way faster than horses. And we're going to see as we move further into the 1800s that the goal of many presidents is going to be to create a transcontinental railroad. And this is a railroad that goes all the way from the East Coast, like Virginia, all the way to California, and then it also runs north and south so that it connects the entire country. And that's going to motivate a lot of politics actually in our country in the 1800s. Steamboat is another big transportation innovation. Steamboats are going to be much, much faster than boats simply using the river to power them. So before a steamboat, you had to take your boat downstream and use the river, and then you actually had to physically row yourself back upstream to get back to where you came from. So using a steamboat is going to be much more efficient, much faster, especially on big rivers like the Missouri and the Mississippi. When it comes to communication, 3 and 6 are the big ones for how it changes communication. The telegraph was a machine that was invented, you can see one right here, that allowed people to send messages across the country through the use of telegraph wires. It's pretty similar to emails today, as when you send an email, you don't really see it physically go to the person, but you know that it gets there. The telegraph, you would type in the message, and it would shoot across the wires, and it would pop out at the other telegraph machine to that person. Telegraphs were very expensive, so not everybody was going to be able to use them. You paid for words, so if you telegraph somebody, you would try to use as few words as possible, which is kind of similar to Twitter today. But it's also not going to be as fast as technology today. So it's not as fast as an email or a text message. But once again, it's changing communication. Before this, it would take months to get mail to somebody, 6 weeks to 8 weeks to get a piece of letter to somebody. And a lot of times mail wasn't accurate and it wouldn't even get to anyone. So you might not hear from family members that you live far apart from or business connections for months at a time. So it was a really inefficient way to communicate. Let's jump to number 6 and talk about the Pony Express since it has to do with communication also. It's going to be a system that as cities develop, because remember during the Industrial Revolution, you're going to have less spread out little towns and a lot more cities develop because of the need for factories and those kind of things. As cities develop, the mail system is going to become a lot more reliable. And the Pony Express was actually really, really big here in Missouri, in St. Joe, and it's going to rely on young adult men, about your age, 14 to 18, that were smaller and could ride on a horse and not tire that horse out. And they rode all across the country to deliver mail a lot faster because you could get it to the city, and then the city would know how to get it to the person from there. Way of life is going to be changed by numbers 4, 5, and 7. Barbed wire to us doesn't seem like a super big deal, right? You probably know it from your childhood as you touched it and ouch, and that's that. But barbed wire radically changed life in this country. In the West, as we've talked about, there was nothing. There were no cities, there were very few towns, and it was just spread out, unsettled land. Well, a man is going to invent barbed wire to fence off his massive farm so that nobody can come and claim part of his land. Barbed wire is going to change the West because people are going to become more settled. And eventually that's going to lead to the development of towns and the developments of cities in some of these new parts in our country. Number 5, we've kind of talked about textile factories. Remember that textiles are anything to do with clothing. And so these are going to be the first type of factories in America. No longer are people going to be making their clothing by hand. They're now going to be able to save that time and buy clothing made in factories, and they can buy that clothing at stores. This is going to free up a lot of women's duties at home, and it's also going to revolutionize the fashion industry. This is really going to be the first time that people really care about widespread fashion, because now you can have what other people have also. And finally, the last invention, and this is really the most important invention, number 7, it's called the cotton gin. It's going to be invented in 1794 by a man named Eli Whitney. He actually gets help in making this invention from one of his slaves. This invention is going to focus all on cotton. Cotton was not produced in high quantities in the South yet. The South was mainly growing things like rice, indigo, and tobacco. The reason that cotton was not produced in the South widely is because that cotton was too time-consuming to pick from the seed. So the white cotton that you see down here and that you're probably familiar with seeing actually comes in a really, really, really hard seed. And you have to break that seed with considerable force and then pull the cotton from the seed. On top of it being a really hard seed, it also has a bunch of teeny tiny barbs on it that cut your fingers after you break too many cotton shells open. So it was very time consuming. The hands of the person picking the cotton would be very quickly ruined. They could only do about 3 or 4 seeds before their fingers were completely cut open and bloody, and then that would ruin the white cotton. So really, cotton was very, very, very hard to produce. It wasn't a big deal in the South. However, towards the end of the 1700s, there was too much tobacco in the world. Tobacco used to be how everybody made money, but because there was so much available, the price in tobacco dropped. So Southern farmers needed to find a new product that would be in high demand. Thanks to the rise of textile factories, with the Industrial Revolution, cotton was in high demand. So Eli Whitney invented this machine here, the cotton gin, that could easily pull the cotton out from the seed without using any more physical labor than the person who cranked this machine. The effect was astronomical. Cotton production skyrocketed. There was so much money in cotton, because everybody needed it for the textile factories, that people rushed out to produce it. And people wanted tons of land. So the amount of farms in America grew exponentially, and people were rushing to get bigger farms to produce more cotton. On these farms, they used slave labor to pick the cotton from the plant, from the bushes, and then the slaves would also carry the cotton to the cotton gin. The amount of slaves in this country increased from less than 1 million in 1790 to more than 2.5 million less than 60 years later because of the cotton gin. The cotton gin is also going to drive the North and South even further apart now that cotton is going to dominate all ways of life in the South.